Welcome back to all those of you joining us from the first session, and welcome to those of you joining the first session of this Cloud Networking Blitz Week presented by Fierce Telecom. My name is Alejandro Piñera. I'm the Senior Director for Conference Planning for TMT here at Fierce Telecom, and it's my pleasure to be your host for this session and throughout the week. As always, before we get started, a special thank you to our partners for this session, Google Cloud, Red Hat, Ribbon, and Robin, without whose support we wouldn't be able to run this event. Right, well, we have a busy hour and a half ahead. I hope you're as excited as we are. Here's a full agenda for what to expect. All times are in Eastern. So here we go. In just a few seconds, we'll be hearing from Hans Raj Nahata from Verizon, and he'll be setting the scene about the cloud strategy over there and what it means for the wider industry. From 2:15 to 2:30 p.m., we'll be joined live by Gabrielli Di Piazza from Google Cloud, and he'll be taking some questions from myself as well as the audience, so please do make sure you send us through more details on that in just a few minutes. Following Gabriele's keynote, we'll be running into our panel. Monica Paolini from Sensafili, an old friend of Fierce, will be joined by speakers from Robin, Red Hat, and the Open Infrastructure Foundation. Finally, after the panel, we'll be hearing from Sanjay Bhatia from Ribbon, and he'll bring the session to a close with his thoughts on cloud networking strategy. So indeed, a very busy hour and a half ahead. And as I mentioned, most of our speakers today in the panel are live, so they'd love to hear from you and hopefully set the discussion in a direction that makes this hour and a half worthwhile for you. To do so, you can use the chat function just on the left-hand side there of the screen. And if you have a question for our speakers or for the moderator of the panel, you can send that directly by using the Q&A tab also on the left-hand side, and that question will go right on to our speakers for them to see. All right, well, that's it from me. Let's hear from the experts who you're really here to see and hear from. So I'm going to hand it over first to Hans Raj Nahata. He's the Network Technology and Strategy Planning Director at Verizon, and we heard from him just late last week on his thoughts on cloud networking. Hans, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. In the next 15 or so minutes, I will be sharing some thoughts on cloud native strategy in the context of telecommunication networks. To serve multitude of customized and scalable premium quality services to our vast array of customers, consumers, small and medium businesses, and enterprises, our networks are quite sophisticated. They support wireline services. They support wireless services, be it 3G or flagship LTE or 5G, ultra 5G. The underlying topology of network is not uniform. The edge of the network, which is closest to the customer, is quite different from the center of the network, which is farthest from the customer. The compute needs across the network, therefore, differ vastly. And without any surprise, so are the requirements of the underlying platforms. We are using the term platforms in a generic sense, from compute accelerators and customized or specialized network cards to fully constructed platform that can operationalize network functions and run services. Similarly, the compute infrastructure for a private network, as an example, will be more suited for its own set of customer needs. Our network is enabled by different applications by many partners. These partners are at a different point in their virtualization journey. So you do see variations like VM-based network functions, cloud-native network functions, and many in-betweens. Simply, there is no way the model that depends on fingers on the keyboard will be able to keep up with the growth of the network, scaling of the network, and the depth of the network. So orchestration in that context is a no-brainer. And virtualization is crucial for service agility to deliver premium quality services efficiently. be it cloud native strategy, orchestration strategy, Open RAN, and many other strategic imperatives. These are to transform the network to offer customizable, high quality product and services that are cost effective. The key here is to influence the technology evolution, in our case, the cloud native technologies, by identifying the right set of use cases to tackle. These use cases could be new services or better way to operate the network. Similarly, for a cloud technique to be meaningful for telco, to be accepted by us, there has to be a set of clearly identified new use cases that are enabled by the specific innovation. The simple discipline is important not only to accelerate the use of cloud networking in telco environment, telco networks, but also to ensure that cloud networking techniques are aligned well with many other initiatives. Transport evolution, O-RAN, 3GPP, HC, device technologies, software-defined networking, and many, many others that are providing the momentum to the transformation of the telco networks. So what are the means to this transformation? We look at standardization to accelerate innovations and implementation of multi-vendor environment. We are involved with Linux Foundations, Cloud Native Computing Foundations, HC, and many others, standards and open source organizations, and expect them to lead simplifications and standardization of interfaces and data models to make interoperability easier and innovation faster. What we look forward to through standards is a reformulation of problem statement that utilizes the technology to its fullest potential and deeper adoption of technology. For example, there is a vast opportunity in vRAN to simplify the management plane, be it software lifecycle management, FCAPS, observability at the service level, performance indicators, or even configuration by leveraging the latest and the best of cloud computing. The working groups in O-RAN that are dealing with the cloud networking could advocate, could take lead, or supply techniques for converting this opportunity to reality. This transformation process, simplification of flows and systems, is also very important to unleash the power of automation, which in turn, as I had mentioned earlier, is must for growth, scaling, and depth of the networks. Of late, cloud computing has started paying close and more attention to the unique needs of telco networks. As you know, the platform needed at the edge of the network, telco network, closest to the customer, is different from the platform that is needed, say, at the core of the network. The scale, for example, varies as you move from the edge of the network towards the core of the network. And with that, so does the need for computation accelerators, networking interfaces, multi-tenancy, isolation, local breakouts, and more. The set of requirements gets even more differentiated once you overlay on top of this the variety of customer segments, enterprises, medium businesses, small businesses, consumers, serve with different product and services. In this context, it has to be extremely clear that it is not just one way of cloud computing anymore for telco. Sophistication is introduced in every stage, from planning the network to building the network to operating the network, with clear implication to technology partnerships, degree of automations, and even orchestration. And the degree of sophistication increases considerably with slicing and their unique impacts to the cloud networking. Here are some of the telco expectations. Let's look at a few of these. 5G brings in enormous focus on multiple service characteristics, from allowed latency associated with the customer experience to density of devices to energy efficiency of the devices. Different services require different and often unique combination of these characteristics. In response to this, network has to be rearranged and reconfigured appropriately, and more importantly for our discussions, with stringent SLAs on the underlying cloud platforms. So the evolving cloud technologies need to be very much aware of 5G characteristics and how these combinations are used to create new services. In a telco network, an integral part of cloud computing is networking, how the data plane is connected across multiple clouds and underlying transport, and how is it different, for example, for the control plane or management plane. Because as you know, each plane and network application has its own unique needs and challenges. A simple projection of OSI layer 2, layer 3, or even layer 4 on cloud networking is neither sufficient, definitely not optimal. Advances in networking within clouds and across clouds has to evolve, keeping the telco needs at the center of the innovation, not necessarily the IT needs or big cloud needs, but the telco needs to meet the requirements of our product and services of today as well as future. Our networks connect millions of customers and devices with each other, and it does it in a way where customers can use and enjoy full set of services and products. Ability to route the bytes within cloud platforms and even across cloud platforms with awareness of that service which is using those bytes is a must. It is important to measure the SLAs of the services and to take closed loop actions on the same. We also need new ways to define and maintain tenancy that operates with highest level of traffic isolation and security while delivering the usual benefits of cloud computing. With ever-increasing scale of our network, we expect cloud technologies to have sufficient automation built in. It cannot be an afterthought, nor it can be a simple continuation of a legacy behavior. Increasing automation needs to be built in to support every aspect of operations, from instantiation of platforms, applications, services, to upgrades, scaling, and other lifecycle management functions associated with slice-based services. Move from pets to cattle, in this sense, is an imperative. To continuously improve the customer experience and experience of those who plan, build, and run these networks, having a close observability of every segment and every layer of network is essential. So when one looks at the innovative approaches in this area, function as a service or serverless computing, multi-cloud or distributed cloud working in tandem, composable applications for management plane, or further movement from low code to no code, or departure from ad nauseum microservices habit, we have to keep in mind how these concepts project onto the telco needs, how to use these models better to meet the expectations of telco customers and operations better. So how do we accelerate the cloud native technologies? Well, have a laser sharp focus on operations. It is a table stakes. Every new cloud techniques should drive to simplify the operations of the networks through standardizations, automations, proactive insights, closed loops, and much more. The span and the depth of sensing the network, that is, knowing the experience delivered to customers for different services, synchronizing different parts of the network to make optimal use of resources, and influencing the network through policies and automated rules should increase with the evolution of cloud technologies. We look at standards to simplify the networks, to enable our partners to produce sophisticated technologies faster and bring those to our networks quicker. Success of cloud technologies depend on how fast it moves on both the dimensions. One of a resource pooling and generalization, and second is of specialized vertical integrations. It cannot be one or the other. It has to be both. Automation has to use the best software techniques, process improvements, and new machine learning technologies for correlation, causation determinations, explanations, and finally the closed loops to keep the network functioning at the best possible level for our customers. Finally, the security of our networks, as always, is non-negotiable. We expect the cloud technologies to keep fortifying it without compromising on the customer experiences. I wish you all a happy and a healthy 2022, and once again, I thank you for inviting me here.
Great. Thank you so much, Hans, for getting us started on such an excellent note. I'm going to move us right along now to our next speaker, Gabrielli Di Piazza. He's a Senior Director for Product Management at Telecom in Google Cloud, and he joins us live. Just a reminder, he'll be taking questions at the end of his talk, and his team are also available on the chat and Q&A tabs for any questions you might have that come up. All right, Gabriele, over to you now.
Thank you, Alejandro. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you live, so we can interact even a little more. I'd like to cover with this short presentation some of my thoughts around accelerating operator cloud native strategies. And it's actually great to follow Hans's presentation, so we can maybe do a deep dive in some of the topics that he actually discussed. But let's look at the market. So acceleration of cloud native strategy is not optional. The topic of digital transformation is key in every conversation in the telecommunication world, because there are a lot of challenges. As you can see, top line revenue growth is still not there. We see, earnings results every other month, which are actually attesting to this. Data consumption is not going down, it's going up. As we saw, this is a general trend. During the COVID pandemic, some of the data consumption immediately accelerated even to numbers much, much higher than what you see on the slide here. Increasing deployment of capital is actually something which we are just in the middle of, right? So of course there is a capital build out cycle, due to 5G deployments, but there are other transformation happening both at the core and the transport in the access for not just mobile, fixed line, as well as fixed wireless access and convergence and cable and TV and so forth. So capital is going to keep increasing. And of course, operating margins is probably the center of the conversation of many of the key CXO conversation that we're having. And as you can see, there's a new paradigm in front of us. It's really not just about transformation and building out new networks, or building out networks with the cloud native technologies and principles, but it's also how to operate those networks and services. There is a transformation in place. This is not an aspect of if this needs to happen, but some of the most advanced carriers starting this transformation already some years ago. Some of them are just in the middle of it. Some of them are planning for. But for sure, cloud and cloud native principle, it will actually lies at the bottom of supporting this digital transformation. So how to think of this as a unified software-defined and a hybrid platform, which of course can support the new deployments of network functions, network services, and basically power consumer and enterprise type of offerings. Secondly, how can this transformation can lead to probably one of the most critical changes is the operational capability. How to look at embracing new models from very fixed models of deploying hardware and software in very long sales cycle, all the way to embracing continuous integration, continuous delivery. In fact, this is something that was even unthinkable just 2-3 years ago, if you think of the traditional life cycle of network and network functions. So how do we prepare for this transformation? And what has been happening in the industry? So if you take a quick look at this transition, obviously we've all been in this industry and around following what happened from physical to virtual transformation with the world of NFV and the early wave of network virtualization. We can say that a lot has been achieved, and in fact a lot of spending actually shifted from physical to virtual in the last 4 to 5 years, and just in the last couple of years virtual overtook some of the physical spending in certain categories. But we are at a critical point today. We are in the middle of the next wave, where effectively some of the complexity are even higher. As Hans was pointing out, it's not just VMs and containers, and then VMs in containers, the adoption of multiple other form factors, the change in automation and orchestration. He mentioned orchestration is key. I agree with that. In fact, I would argue that we have not seen a lot of extensive deployments of multi-vendor orchestrations in the market so far, but this will become a requirement going forward. And if you are, as a key cloud vendor and also on the edge of certain areas, such as cloud native transformation, Kubernetes, artificial intelligence, and many other technologies, SDN and so forth, at Google, we are looking to the right side of the slide. How can we enable a truly cloud native transformation? How can we start evolving towards a common infrastructure management, which will basically embrace not anymore the on-premise technologies or data center technologies, but how can we now evolve into a network that would basically be fully distributed across public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, of course, and all the way from larger footprint at the core of the networks, all the way to the endpoints, which are much closer to consumers. This is actually yet a massive transformation, which requires a lot of different principles, and would actually require focusing on some key aspects. As an example, here's some of the key challenges. The network complexity is actually going up, it's not going down. Hans mentioned as well, physical functions, virtualized network function, containerized or cloud native network function, 5G services being deployed, network slices. So the explosion of different form factors and complexity is actually just starting right now. Number of sites and services. Obviously, cloud or IT technology has been applied in some of the core data center locations, some of the early deployments at the edge, But the reality is that we start to see now tens of thousands of sites being considered for deployment all the way to, for example, radio access networks. Architecture is still siloed. They are lacking multi-vendor support. Despite all of this transformation, we actually have seen still a fragmented ecosystem and lack of standardization. This is actually the topic of standardization is something that is being rediscussed every year. And of course, the configuration management, the drift and the management of sprawl of configuration is something that's actually adding additional complexities. So what are the core principles they're working towards? It's important not to just focus on one. Openness is key. The ecosystem is still forming, and therefore basing this transformation on open technologies, open APIs, the open source world is actually very important and it's actually growing in importance. Intelligence needs to be baked in as some of the rule-based capabilities deployed in the past are not enough anymore. And when cloud comes into play, artificial intelligence starts to play a key role in deciding how to place application, how to route connectivities and so forth. Consistency is also key, how to have a consistent environment across the different deployment models and across the different deployment locations. And of course, modern, proven, and secure are some of the inheriting characteristics of what cloud brings into this market. So from a Google perspective, what are we looking? Our approach is the ability to create state-of-the-art 5G networks. As you can see, common technologies cutting across, as you know, we have, of course, key technologies such as Anthos, as well as our newly launched Google Distributed Cloud. Our mantra is, meet customers where they are. Therefore, not force them into a specific location, but actually being able to architect networks, mixing up environment and workloads on public cloud, on regions, on some of our own edges, which have thousands of points around the world, and of course powering some of the most latency sensitive and demanding workloads all the way to closer to the users. And let's also keep in mind that a network is not an isolated set of functions, but it still requires integration with applications along the way, integration with machine learning and analytics. And in fact, one of the key aspects of us is how do the operations will change. We really believe into an intent-driven network. This is how Google Cloud and Google in general build our own network over this, over the years. How to express a network intent, and how can we actually have these expressed into a certain set of APIs or configuration? How does this gets validated and compiled into a network orchestration, into a service orchestration environment, and therefore landing into a network which these days is not anymore, as we discussed, physical or virtual, but now becomes cloud, because many of the services lands on cloud, so the same principle should apply, and creating this continuous visibility of network and service state, and a feedback loop in order to basically maintain that intent. And as we, of course, close the conversation, some of the key differentiators is not just about technical. How do we now look at the core aspect, cost of operations, how cloud native approaches can actually lower cost of ops. Otherwise, the benefits that we discussed are not going to be tangible. Secondly, open and consistent deployments. I want to reinforce that because we cannot rethink of fragmentation. We need to solve the problem and also the different silo. A partner ecosystem that can scale. There's not one company in the market that can do it all. And there's a very hard requirement of making sure that our collaborations across the board. And of course, security and compliance are key aspects. even more so in regulated markets, and we actually are looking at some of the countries in Europe and others which require data sovereignty and so forth. So with this, these are some thoughts that are put together. Alejandro, over to you. I'm sure if you have any questions or if you want to have a quick chat about it.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriele. Very interesting to hear your thoughts on cloud networking and cloud native networks. And I found really quite fascinating that you yourselves have been leveraging this in your own networks, of course. So can I ask you this then? We've been talking about cloud native networks for a little while now. When do you think we'll be seeing CSPs deploy them, perhaps at a larger scale or even a global scale than we are now?
Yes, maybe as you pointed out, maybe at Google we had the benefit of building our network ground up, and so we actually applied some of this technology for at least for the last 5 years. And I've seen this starting to actually happen into some smaller deployments. In some cases, we are managing some deployment in a fully cloud native, fully containerized, intent-based driven approach where we see terabits and terabits of traffic. But I would say we will probably see this happen over the course of 2022, and I think going into 2024, 2025. This is a radical change. As I mentioned, it's not just a technology change, but it's a operations, people, and all the way to sales and marketing in terms of how these services will actually be introduced into the market.
Brilliant. Well, Gabriele, there are questions coming into the Q&A tab, and which I'd love to get through, but I'm afraid we're running out of time. So hopefully you and the team can get back to those folks. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us and for your time. Really, really always fascinating to hear what Google Cloud is up to.
Thank you.
Great. Well, now that we've heard from Verizon and Google Cloud, I'd like to bring us forward now to our panel. Monica Paolini from Senza Fili is joined by speakers from the Open Networking Foundation, Red Hat, and Robin. So, Monica, over to you.
Alejandro, thanks for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and today we had a really hot topic, cloud native. And I have three excellent panelists that bring a somewhat different perspective. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion that we have ahead. And so we're going to talk about cloud native, but we're going to take one step backwards and then move forward, and we're going to start defining it. But before we go there, well, first of all, one housekeeping item. I would like to encourage you to ask questions as we go along, and I'll try to weave them in the conversation. So we will have Q&A at the end, but it would be even better if you give us your questions now, and we'll plug them in where appropriate. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to have the speakers introduce themselves, and then we're going to go with the questions. Okay. So we have for the speakers, panelists, we have Mehran Hadipur, who's the VP of Business Development and Technology Alliances at Robin. Then we have Fartiner, is the Chief Architect and for the Telco Partner Solutions at Red Hat. And Ildiko Vancha, the Senior Manager for the Community and Ecosystems at the Open Infrastructure Foundation. So I would like to ask you guys to introduce themselves so the audience know where you're coming from and what it is that you're doing in terms of cloud native deployments. Why don't we start with you, Ildiko?
Sure. So I work for a foundation, and we are supporting open source software development communities. I work as a community manager for one of our projects. It's called Starting X. It is actually a fully integrated cloud platform that is optimized for edge and IoT use cases. So the cloud native principles play a role for the applications that come on top of that project. I'm also a co-leader of the Open Infra Edge Computing Group. And when it comes to the more technical aspects, my focus areas are telecommunication, NFV, and edge computing. Should I go into the cloud native thoughts here as well, or we do that after the intro?
No, not yet. Not yet. We're gonna get in a minute into we're gonna get into the weeds in a minute. In a minute. Okay. Fatih, what about you?
Hello, my name is Fartiner, based in Dallas, Texas. I'm a chief architect by the title at Red Hat, mainly for solutioning, solution blueprints, and engineering. But at core, I'm a curious engineer. Previously, I was part of Google Cloud, Canonical Ubuntu as a distro, as well as Ericsson as a development and developer engineer. And I'm into not only consuming the technology, but also designing and implementing and complementing the technology as well. And here at Red Hat, pretty much doing the same, consuming the technology, developing the technology, finding the gaps, and addressing them.
Excellent. How about you, Miran?
Hello, Miran Hadipur. I'm VP of Alliances and Technology Partnerships in Robin. I've been working with a lot of partners to build the entire end-to-end ecosystem for 5G service delivery. And Robin has a container orchestration platform that is designed for telco and supports end-to-end orchestration of telco workloads. And that's our offering that we have in the market today.
Excellent. And Ildiko is also Seattle, like as I am. Miran, where are you calling from? Can you tell us?
I'm in Miami, Florida. You can see the ocean in the background, so it's actually quite warm and nice.
Well, that's good to hear from the Seattle crowd here. Okay, so as I said, we're going to step back 1 second and say, okay, what is cloud native? Because at some level, we know what we're talking about, right? But so I would like to ask you, what is for you, and what do you think is the one most important benefit? If you only have to list one, clearly there's more than one, but if you have to pick one, what would that be? And let's go to reverse order. Miran, why don't you start first?
Sure. I think cloud native, or this idea of application modernization on cloud native, is really brings efficiency and automation, especially to network functions. I think the primary value of cloud native is exactly that, to create a more efficient and easier to manage infrastructure to deploying network functions.
Okay. Ildiko.
I think when it comes to cloud native, I think it is important to clarify that cloud native really is about the application space, and it really is about the guiding principles in terms of how you should be designing your applications and your workloads so that they can live on top of a cloud environment like a first-class native citizens. So teach and design the applications in a way that they know what they can expect from the platform and what they cannot expect. I think a good example to this is telecom applications, because they used to be designed in a way that they lived really closely coupled with the underlying hardware and operating system that was running on that hardware. And once you put the cloud layer between the hardware and the application, that completely changes the game. So I think when we are mentioning advantages of cloud native, I would say that, especially for the networking and telecom space, it's not about the advantages. It is an absolute must to design applications with the cloud native mindset and following the principles. Otherwise, you will not get the performance, the resource utilization, and other benefits that the cloud platform has to offer.
And I guess it's also the other way around to think about it is that because it forces you to think about the applications in a new way, there is a lot of potential there. So not only it's a new tool, but it's a new tool that allows you to do things differently, which is in itself can be an advantage. Fatih, nice red hat on the background.
Thank you.
What about you? What do you think?
Good. I did it on purpose, by the way.
Oh, yeah,
So,
I got
so
that, but it's still nice. It's still nice.
thank you. Thank you. So for me, as all the colleagues were saying, pretty much pointing the same thing. For me, is the consistency, because consistency from an experience point of view that I'm consuming and using the platform underneath me. When I say me as an application, as a business owner, I only care about my application. That makes money for me. I don't care much about the platform that I'm running on or the infrastructure I'm depending on. I want the same consistency wherever I'm running my applications. Could be one cloud, could be another cloud, could be on-prem. I just want consistency for the same experience, for the same performance, for the same affordability, for the same availability, just the same consistency.
Absolutely. See, yeah, and I guess that's really important because it's application. It doesn't matter how good a technology is if you don't have, if you're not have consistency, reliability. What we do about it?
Correct.
Now, when you get to talk about consistency, reliability, sometimes the issue of open source comes up, and so the question is, what is the role within this of being having an open source foundation, and also that open source, and also when you go to Open RAN, so it's basically openness as a way to approach network. We're moving to networks that are more and more open. Open source is one way, but there is clearly a role where everybody in the ecosystem plays. So what is the balance between the two? And I would like to ask this question to Ildiko first, but I'm sure you'll have to comment on this. So go ahead, Ildiko.
So do I have a whole hour to answer?
Yeah, we're going to ask for an extension of time. Yeah, go ahead.
So when it comes to open source, there are so many parts to it that I can talk about in terms of why it is crucial to have open source building blocks available, but not just the software part, but also having open source communities available in the different spaces to cover infrastructure, having the components available, and having a place for people to come together and talk about innovation and enhancements to existing platforms and software, and also come up with new solutions and ideas. So when it comes to the cloud native space, I believe that especially for telecom operators, it is a struggle, not just from technology perspective, but really is the skill set and some of the design principles, because it is just new compared to what they have been doing in the past. And in my experience, open source communities are a really good place to learn from others who have been doing or using a certain technology for a longer period of time. And the Open Infrastructure Foundation, we have communities that are implementing software that is relevant for telecom and networking, like OpenStack, the open source cloud platform, I believe. Most of you heard of it already. It is a good example from the perspective of how the enterprise cloud people were working together with telecom operators, and both sides were learning in terms of how cloud can help telcos to run their networks way more efficiently, have a much better resource utilization, and the enterprise IT people were also learning what the challenges are on the telecom space, what networking requirements they have, why they want a certain feature to be available in a cloud platform. And now that we more or less sorted out the cloud infrastructure space, I see the same but more fluent collaboration happening in this space to figure out how to design those applications, how to package and deploy them, what is DevOps, what is CI/CD, and all these new terms and ways of working that are coming to the surface. So there is a lot of collaboration going on there. I've been participating in Linux Foundation networking projects as well, like, for instance, Anaket, or some of the SDN controller projects like Open Daylight and Tungsten Fabric. And there is a lot of collaboration between these communities. We're also looking into collaborating with communities and groups in the CNCF ecosystem. So when you look at open source, it really is not just about the availability of the source code, but what you get from collaborating with other people in your industry segment or in different industry segments, different companies who might be your collaborators in some extent, or your partners, but you are participating in these open discussions and everybody's understanding both the requirements as well as the solutions better.
Now, yeah, and this is really important. It's more collaboration, more open system. But Fatih, let me ask you, move to you and see what your perspective is. Is open source all we need for cloud native? I mean, is there some component that goes beyond open source? Clearly, I mean, there's a lot of them, but how do we address that?
All right, let's take a step back and refer to flashback to Hans's talk, right? One part he called out converting pets to cattle, right? That was the point, that we were seeking the uniform same experiences across multi-vendor or maybe network equipment provider platforms. We want consistency, same consistency, so we wanted to convert pets to the cattle. All right. Now, another reference to Gabriela's talk. Google built their own networking. Google built their own platforms. And then you see AWS built their own thing. Azure built their own thing. And you realize, dude, what are we doing? We were supposed to convert pets to the kettles. Now we are converting kettles into different kettles. And then you're realizing, how can we prevent this? That we are not creating, again, pets of the kettles. That's where the open source comes into the picture, providing the one abstraction layer above the infrastructure, above the platforms, wherever you want to put, and open source to be the uniform and consistent experience for you. So we are trying to prevent turning cattle into pets again. We are trying to prevent that right now. And that's where the open source is really important. However, the trick shot is, now you see that whenever you go to CNCF or the Linux Foundation, every other day, there's another new open source shining. New trends for this CI/CD, yet another observability tracing tool. Like we needed more because we had already 99 of them. And you're saying, why is this happening? Why are we still turning cattle into pets? And now there's another sickness, which is promotion-driven development within the organizations supporting open source. This is where we need to tackle the issue. Open source is the answer, but let's not get open source to create a cancer within, but stick on what we need and enhance it rather than reinventing the wheel 100 times.
Absolutely. Yeah, we cannot reinvent the wheel. We need to sort of be focused on what's important and avoid fragmentation so that we all can collaborate without getting too much. Miran, what are your thoughts on this? This is really like a key issue, right?
It is important, but I think that sometimes we kind of miss the primary objective. I mean, open source is not being looked at as a goal. but only a tool, right? And network function delivery is not like feeding cattle. It's a lot more complicated. You have to have a supported environment. You have to have end-to-end infrastructure that's managed. You have to have service levels that you operate on. I think open source has a role to play in building or promoting disaggregation and softwarization of telco stack and reducing cost for the operators. But the primary challenge remains, right? Creating an environment that is as heterogeneous as possible, so you're no longer dependent on a single vendor. You're able to create a network function that's a combination of BNFs and CNFs, run it on the cloud native environment, and manage it as a unified fashion. So if that's the goal and objective, or so-called feeding of the cattle, we have to make sure open source can bring interoperability, connectivity, and so on. But open source is not the answer. It's just a promotional approach that we can bring these vendors together to collaborate and share APIs. And hopefully we can have a end-to-end disaggregated stack that people can choose DU from somebody, CU from somebody, and cloud native platform from somebody else, and they all interoperate. We are not there today. So we have still ways to go, but I think platforms that can support both running containerized and non-containerized workload in a scalable environment, and it would then get you one step closer to that goal. And that's exactly what we try to do.
Yeah. So how exactly are we gonna get there? And more specifically, what is the role that you see that automation and orchestration is going to have to take us there?
That's a really heart of the problem. Really, is orchestration and automation. I think the Horizon call was a good example of many of the challenges I was talking about. The only affordable way to deploy today's 5G stack is by hyperautomation. There needs to be a model that can survive the 5G scale and be able to deliver from the instantiation, from the point in time that you bring a piece of hardware with nothing on it and then connect it to the base station, to the point in time that the operating system is installed on it, BIOS is configured, Kubernetes is installed, network function is running on it, and service change is deployed across all the tens and thousands of units just deployed in the field with very little support. Without automation, there's not enough people in the world to do this, right? So it needs to be automated. It needs to be automated end to end. We need to build metal to service orchestration. That's what MDCAP product does for Robin, for example. We need to be able to have that as a first step, not as a last step, not as an afterthought. The whole network function has to be designed for automation, not only deployment, but also lifecycle operations, end-to-end management, upgrade, scaling and healing automation. All those things have to be considered.
Absolutely. And any comments from you guys? So
I would just double down on all of this. I mean, automation is crucial. I think it was Gabriella who started to talk and touch on edge computing and these edge environments and those thousands of sites. So every now and then you can see like an antenna and the tower on the top of a mountain, and you know that there won't be a service maintenance guy going up there every second day if something happened. So there are a lot of places that are really hard to reach. Therefore, it's really expensive to send out a human being to fix a small issue. So you have to be able to automate not just the deployment, but really the end-to-end management of your sites, how you patch it, how you fix it, how you roll out changes without any or much downtime to it. And when it comes to automation and orchestration, then we just kind of also have to face with the fact that all these things, these infrastructures, the bigger the scale is, the more complex they get. We always want everything to be simple, but the fact is that nothing is simple. It is on us to figure out how that automation can be done in a way that it's not as much manual labor anymore. Like if you just look at recent news with the Log4j security issues, then you have to be able to patch your system, and most systems are just not equipped with enough automation to be able to patch them quickly and easily.
Absolutely. So, Fatih, I saw you were nodding when Miran was speaking. So, maybe you can tell us, and I guess, it's easy to say, yeah, we all want automation, but are we really making progress? And how do you see that?
All right. So, by the way, I wasn't nodding. I was just supporting what he was saying. I'm 100% agree with the points he made.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So let me take one step back, because I think those were great points. Automation in the sense of application itself as a self-autonomous applications, say managed through an operator for the application lifecycle management, right? That's one thing. The automation could be used in another fashion, say that, hey, I have a service orchestrator. I want to automate deployment and maintenance of these applications on these particular platforms, meaning you're talking about the API layer between your orchestration and the platform. That's the API layer that you're literally kind of hinting into. So again, the consistency of the APIs is critical for your automation to work properly. If your APIs keeps getting backward, not compatible, your automation story, rest in peace. So automation depending on consistent APIs for deployment for day 0 as well as day 1 operations, day 2 for scalability is critical. The other thing I would like to mention is when you're doing automation, you have basic dependencies. Say the application binaries that's going to deploy, say container images, configuration management. And then from service orchestration, it's not that simple. You have to closely monitor the utilization levels, the performance, the traffic, the closed loop thing that the Gabriella was hinting. So the whole ecosystem around control, self-scaling, self-healing, autonomous application ecosystems is, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but consistency from platform, consistency from API, not only magical self-orchestration is doing this. This is the whole one big picture depending on consistent parts in the machinery.
Absolutely. Now, let me ask another dimensions, because whenever you change, there's all sorts of dimensions that we need to consider, and security clearly is top of mind for everybody. So, Miran, could you comment on it? If as we switch to cloud native, are we going to pay a price in reduced security? How do we make sure that everything is secure? What is the security story there?
Actually, security is a bit of a complex story, and cloud native is not a solution to the security, but you have to build the security into the cloud native deployment from ground up to achieve it. It's not that the cloud native is less secure in any way. Actually, you can build a very secure cloud native environment. You can segregate your networking. You can have resource pools that are isolated. You can have data address encryption for persistent volumes. You can have a number of things you can do. You can have service mesh controlling the hot pods communicate to each other. You can build a network stack delivery that is very secure and is cloud native. You can also support not only the current containerized workload in CNFs on Kubernetes. We have provisioning that can provision virtual machines and containers and build a network function as a combination of both together. So this allows you to be cloud native on infrastructure, secure that infrastructure, and then host all your network functions on top without having to be all containerized, which is going to take years to come, right? Only a small portion of the cloud native network functions are containerized today. And if you have to wait for everyone to be containerized and build the security on containers and VMs and figure out how you connect them to each other, you're going to have a big problem on your hands. So I think designing security in is the way you solve that problem.
Yeah, and I guess that if I hear you correctly, so you just don't add things at the end. Automation, security is just something you need to start thinking from day one, and then move on to make sure that everything is. Any other comments from you on security?
I think one thing is, also maybe I'd like to add, security is also a process, right? You can secure the infrastructure, you can secure the application, but for example, certifying apps before they can onboard it, that's a process, right? So you have to look at security in terms of end-to-end. You don't think of it as a deployment approach. It's more than that. You have to, everything that you do has to be secure.
Yeah. And I have to say that the three of you are very honest in terms of not downplaying the security, and like, it doesn't necessarily security, the complexity, and it's not like, oh, you just plug it in and we're good. So I'm going to ask you another question in terms of, it's really important when you have a new technology to be realistic about it. It's very easy to be excited, but we also need to be realistic. And so one question I'd like to ask you is that if you have a greenfield operator, clearly go cloud native. But are there specific challenges for an operator for a brownfield operator that has a lot of legacy to deal with? And so I don't know, maybe Fatih, you want to? Okay, go ahead.
Now go ahead. Now Fatih can take it on. Obviously, it is a challenge. Brownfield is more complicated, but I think the only thing I like to add is that brownfield and greenfield, you have to start your innovation somewhere. Right? If you want to modernize your network, you start with the RAN, you start with the core, you start with OSS. But it's important to start, but you're not going to have a situation that you're going to throw everything away and start from the beginning, right? That's very rare. So, and you don't have to do that. You can be cloud native. You can have VMs and containers running on the same infrastructure. I would start by low-hanging fruit. RAN, obviously, a good place because there's significant costs associated with it. And then you can expand from there. Back to you. Sorry, I don't want to take over the...
On the edge to the core. Okay, Fatih, next, what do you think?
Look, there was a beautiful movie called Beautiful Mind, and in that we have been presented to the game theory, if you remember that. So complexity is in your mind. If you aim so impossible places to be, you will probably not be at it. But if you aim the middle ground and incrementally increase your ambitions and targets, you'll probably get there. So you might have legacy systems, yet you want to be like internet companies. Yeah, but if you well plan your organization, by terms of people, talent, the way you tackle issues, as well as the process, people, process, technology, right? Everybody talks about PPT. It's not the PowerPoint. People, process, technology. So people empowered with the process, enabled by the technology, can tackle even the brownfield deployments if you have the right PPT in place. From security perspective, as I refer back to the previous question, security, everybody, if you ask the most well-known person on planet for security, he or she will say that you shall not think security as an out-of-box add-on item. Security should be in your DNA. In our case, that as Gabriella was showing, compute, storage, network, the three essential DNAs of the infrastructure. If you already embedded your security practices and security tools and hardening into these three DNAs, you're in the right path. But you didn't do that homework, but you're trying to add on the security as a component plugin, you will likely fail.
Absolutely. And I think that sort of points to the fact that you just need to have sort of more holistic. It's not, cloud native is a tool, but it's just a way to think about the way you structure a network differently. And so it's more, it's a tool, but it's also more than that, in the sense that you need to sort of put all the ingredients in there. And like security is nothing new, but
absolutely. So if you look at this whole cloud native thing, microservices, I know it's kind of everybody's just using too much and not necessarily referring enough to the 12-factor applications. If you search the 12-factor application, you will find a Bible website showing you what are the critical, essential, I would say, feature sets of a cloud native application by means of 12 rules. And if you look at it, you'll see one part is organization, one is the process and technology, and all that kind of growing around it. Cloud native is mainly the holistic view of that 12 factor in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to follow up with Ildiko on this issue about brownfield operators, and talk about the skill sets. Before you mentioned the issue about having the right skill set. I mean, the people working in not just the service provider, but also at the vendor side, because this is an end to end issue. Do we have the people? So cloud native is a new way to think about things, but do we have the people that are able to hit the ground running? Do we have the right, well, first of all, it's like preparation, sort of like the technical knowledge, but also the skill sets. We have the culture in those companies, because no matter how good the technology is, nobody knows or there is a will, an intent to actually deploy it. That's an issue. So what are your view on that?
So let me reflect back to some of the previous questions as well, because when you mentioned, for instance, the Brownfield Challenges, before the Open Infra Foundation, I worked for Ericsson, that is a large telecom vendor, and it was at the time when cloud came into the telecom world, and everybody was realizing that that will be something that we just must have a cloud platform for telcos. And I was witnessing, the telecom operators and vendors trying to put the physical functions into virtual machines and say that, okay, now it runs on top of the cloud because it's in a virtual machine. However, it didn't perform well, and it had all kinds of issues, but it runs on the cloud now, so our work is done. So I think that kind of going with the technology changes is really hard. Like, in my personal experience, humans usually don't really react that well to change, at least a large group of them. And we just sometimes try to find the easy way out. So if cloud comes with virtual machines, whenever we put something into the virtual machine, then our work is done, we solved the problem. And I did get the question a few years later when containers came into the picture that, okay, so if I put my function from the virtual machine to the container now, then, will that solve my problem? And then I was like, no, because you still have to design your application to be able to run on top of that cloud. And that is why I really like to double down on the fact that cloud native does not equal containers. It doesn't even equal microservices, because those are technology solutions, but they will not make up for the lack of following the principles. And that's where also building the human's skill set comes into the picture, with the automation, the CI/CD, or how we are solving security issues. That also has to appear in the skill sets and growing skill sets. On one of the Edge working group calls, we talked about IPv6 and how great that would be for edge computing if companies would be able to move to IPv6 only. And then the big gap in skill set came up, that actually not that many people are advancing IPv6 in the industry. So how will we solve that challenge? And I mentioned that open source and the open source space is great to learn and build the skill set, but the companies, both on the operator and the vendor side, also has to have an open mind. Not in the open source community way, just in general, to be open to change and embrace change, and really understand what cloud native principles are, and then how the applications need to be built and structured and work together. And as the applications work together, the teams that are working on those applications and the pieces of the applications, they also have to work together and communicate, both within companies and organizations, as well as if they are participating in any of the open source communities, then there as well.
Yeah, if I may.
Yeah. So what is that, in concrete terms? So we need to have. Sorry, go ahead, Fatih. Go ahead.
These are great points, right? I mean, in short, what I get is making things complex doesn't make the system more secure. No, it's not like that. You may think that making things complex, oh, I have GitHub as a single source of truth. I have GitHub Actions. I have CI/CD pipeline for building images, and I have this delivery orchestration for the placements. This is so complex to, kind of get into. So I made it secure. No, if it was true, we wouldn't have SolarWinds. Okay, so this is what happened in SolarWinds. Somebody hacked down the whole pipeline, put a code, and the whole code delivered to every field, and now the whole system is hacked. All right, good job, right? So it's kind of a, yet you want to simplify, as in the previous talks we were pointing, simplifying, as Hans was saying, standardize and simplify things together with automation, not necessarily making complex even you cannot comprehend by yourself.
And if I just may add one point on the technology side, evolution is so important, and how containers are not necessarily just the next step and virtual machines are out. There is evolution in both spaces. There is an open source project. It's called Kata Containers. It is actually a fusion between virtual machines and containers. It has a really stripped down virtual machine and a container inside. So if you look at it from the outside world, it looks like a container, but it does have advantages from the virtual machine world, providing isolation, giving the container its own kernel choice. So when like the main machine's kernel is hacked, your container that is wrapped into a thin virtual machine is still safe, or well, much safer compared to a traditional container, because they are not that good at containing after all. So I think that also shows towards the direction of how we can evolve what we have and make it better, as opposed to throw everything away and try to re-implement everything from scratch.
Absolutely. So let me ask you sort of follow-up question here in terms of, what are the concrete steps that a service provider or a vendor can and should take to move to go past this sort of culture/skill challenge of the new technology? Is it just is it giving more technical information so that their staff know they get more knowledgeable? Is it moving beyond a siloed structure, so like the internal division of the companies? Is it the need for guidance from up top to have the right incentives for people to move? And because sometimes when I talk to service providers, they'll say, yeah, we want to do it, but then it just seems like it's just not quite. They have all the intentions, but that is not quite working. So, what do you think is the most important element there?
I can maybe make one comment and others could follow. I think it's an important problem that we're looking at modernization and containerization as a value-added model that could save a lot of money and is kind of the nirvana, and everybody's going that direction. And we often face with the challenge, and how do you actually get there, right? Do I have the skills of people to be able to run this? Can I deploy my applications I already have in the environment? I cannot convert everything to containers. How would I do it tomorrow? And some of these challenges could actually be solved by processes, procedures, and approaches to solving the problem beyond just container versus VMware, right? If the idea would be to build a model that can be managed and requires the application people to be infrastructure independent. They could build their network capabilities as an application and being able to deploy on the underlying environment on a standard way, and doesn't have to worry about the infrastructure, whether it's cloud or whether it's bare metal, and all the underlying infrastructure operations are segregated and automated and provided on the CI/CD process to the people. So all the guys have to know is how to build the application stack. Right? And the infrastructure stack is well managed, deployed, and automated. This now opens the door to getting there much faster. You don't have to reinvent your entire wheel and from engine all the way up, right? You build the infrastructure, you go bring your application on there.
Yeah, one thing I would like to add on
Absolutely.
that is
Any other comments on that?
yeah. So one thing is when you're consuming cloud, it could be on-prem or it could be hyperscaler. When you're consuming cloud as an application owner, be aware that what you're signing on based on what you're consuming from infrastructure. If you're consuming infrastructure as a service, you have to deal with the operating system patches, the whatever platform you deploy by yourself. If you're consuming platform, be aware what you're going to put on top of it as a CI/CD pipeline, the source repos. If you're consuming SaaS, check out the SLA levels, what they are confirming with. Is this suitable for your business? Just look at what you are signing on to pay for in with respect to what you're going to get out of it. Do not assume that everything you consume at cloud is SLA backed. Don't do that mistake.
Absolutely. So go ahead. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think what Fatih just said, it also kind of points towards the importance of training and train the people within these organizations from moving from one place to the next and go with innovation. And I also kind of see that there isn't such a big gap between the telecom segment and like the enterprise IT segment as it used to be like, I don't know, 7 years ago. So I can see people moving between. So maybe that will be kind of part of the solution here when it comes to the skill set, is that if the telecom systems will not be that much of a snowflake and the special thing anymore, then it will probably be easier to fill the gaps when it comes to the skill set as well. So you're not just learning from the other person in the open source community who's working in a totally other field, but maybe that person will at some point say that, okay, maybe I will go over and see how the telecom segment looks like and what I can do there.
Okay, we are pretty much at the end, but before I let you go, I wanted to go back to the topic and ask you a very quick fire question. So we're talking about accelerating cloud native strategy. If there is one thing that service providers can do to accelerate the path, what would that be? Very quick. Miran.
Well, I think the primary thing would be to embark on automation and orchestration that can support cloud native and virtual environment at the same time. That way they don't have to decide what network function gets onboarded, how do you build their stack, and divorce themselves from worrying about the complexities of integration.
Ildiko.
I would say that focus on automation and also these new trends of CI/CD and DevOps, and just kind of keep on with the evolution path as the service providers already have been doing, and double down on that.
Fatih?
Okay, so for me, my dear customers or partners, do not buy snake oil for yourself and for your business. Because there is no such thing as one cloud for every application, one hyperscaler for application. That's a snake oil. Be aware what you need by means of requirements and dependencies, and be smart about choosing your partner to go with your multi-cloud strategy. Otherwise, as in the previous presentations, everybody focuses on the application layer and ignores the infrastructure, storage, compute, and network. You'll see that people don't change those layers. Although you have high throughput, low latency, big MTUs, Jumbo frame supports multiple interfaces requirements from telcos. None of these people talking about those basic infrastructure requirements and focusing on 3 layers above. That, for me, is just be aware, just be smart.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much, and thank you all in the audience for participating. And Alejandro, apologies for running a little bit late.
No worries, Monica. And thank you, of course, to our panelists, Fatih, Iliko, and Mehran. All right, we're going to move now to our closing keynote. We're going to hear from Sanjay Bhatia. He's a VP for Solutions Marketing and Strategy at Ribbon. So, Sanjay, without further ado, the stage is all yours.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Alejandro. Some great discussion from Verizon, from Gabriel at Google, and of course the panel. So I'll be providing you a vendor perspective for cloud native and how things can be accelerated. So let's go ahead and get into it. Basically, if you don't know who Ribbon is, we provide secure voice services in private and public cloud environments, both for service providers and enterprises. And we also provide IP and optical networking solutions to service providers and critical infrastructure. Okay, so let's go ahead and first, I mean, clearly the landscape that's been, just based on the agenda, we had the service provider, Verizon present first. We had Google as a hyperscaler present. And of course, there's an intersection there, and many service providers are also working with the hyperscalers. And basically, everyone is trying to provide newer services, faster services to consumers, SMB, and enterprises, right? So that's kind of the broad setup here. And what everyone wants to do is do this more cost effectively in their network in terms of operations, and be able to do this in a different way that allows everyone to scale and introduce these new services, exciting new services rapidly. So that's kind of the broader setup. And this had been mentioned, right? If you look at a brownfield existing service provider that's been around for many, many, many years, it's been a journey, right? They started with physical devices in their networks, virtualization, NFV, and now cloud native, right? So it's a journey. And similarly, many vendors are on the same journey. And so a number of service providers have started their way into the cloud native implementations. They've started in parts of their network based on our experiences. And of course, the key for that stage is automation, as many alluded to in the previous presentations. Automation is key. Orchestration is key. Analytics and closed loop analytics is key. All of those aspects are key in enabling cloud native. So with Ribbon, we are way into the cloud native phase, and I'll show you some examples of some deployments that we have and some of the learnings that we've gathered through that exercise as well. So let's, with that, what has been our experience in working with many service providers, and what are they doing, right? So first, clearly this needs to be a platform approach. They may choose to work on parts of their network first, as in the edge or on the RAN side, and then move to the core. We've had examples of that. Or some may start in different parts of other parts of the network. And this applies to all, as Gabriel mentioned, it applies to mobile networks, it applies to fixed networks, it applies to MSO networks, and on, right? So, we've seen folks moving into the core, and, we certainly have projects that I'll talk about on the core side of things. The next thing, skill sets and building up that scale in terms of skilled resources. So familiar with cloud native technologies is clearly a challenge on the brownfield side, and so in order to scale, they have to continue to build up those skill sets within the organizations. The other one that we have noticed a number of service providers have done is they start small and they learn quickly, and then they have started to adapt best practices within their processes to enhance and increase the speed with which they deploy cloud native. Open source and applying ongoing cloud innovations, open source communities are key to this, as well as the hyperscalers. There's ongoing new cloud technology being introduced, and so it's important to continue to keep that flow going in terms of a loop back into your organization. This is the next one is key is, especially if you're a brownfield, is integration into existing systems. How do you, basically create backwards compatibility? Because the other alternative to that is duplicate everything, double your costs, and that's not feasible. And so we at Ribbon, we have a very keen eye on making sure that in terms of our introduction of cloud native functions, we make sure that there's backwards compatibility and the ability to tie into existing backend systems. It's a very important aspect of cloud native, especially for the brownfield service providers. And then security was just brought up and is key. Cloud native and going private public cloud does increase the threat parameters. And so security is a multi-layered, multifaceted approach, and all aspects of all the way from applications to infrastructure and on, right? Everything has to be, all the doors have to be shut. Otherwise, if one door is open, the bad guys can get in. So, and you don't want to be on the front page of the news. So let me give you the Ribbon approach and how we are approaching cloud native in terms of how we are introducing cloud network functions and the things associated around it that ease the operations aspect for our customers. And that's what we call frictionless introduction of the cloud native function. So we have a keen eye on not only making sure that we are abiding by the key tenets of the architecture in terms of microservices and Kubernetes and all of those aspects, but also making sure the most important pillar is the operation side and how you make it simple and easy for our customers to consume, so to speak, our network functions that enable many new services for them. So that's kind of the mindset, and so I'll go through each one of them. So let's start with the architecture, and this is pretty standard and well known in the industry. In terms of microservices and CNFs, just having separate logic and state, to allow for stateless workers, designed for upgrades, also to keep in mind progressive upgrades, things like blue-green progressive deployments, those kind of concepts. So, and that also goes back into the operations side. And then basically making sure that whatever, in terms of the network functions that we are providing, that fit in back into the cloud platform services easily. And so those are some of the key tenets of the architecture and designs of the cloud native functions. But the more important part, I think that's a given, but where the rubber meets the road for brownfield service providers, and it's very critical in order for them to actually gain the operational savings that are promised with cloud native, and the ability to be agile and scale and all of that. The operations is extremely important. And so, when you talk about operations, what are the drivers for automation within the service providers? And this is something, and I'll go slow here because these are important aspects that we feel are go to the heart of making it easier. There was discussion about going from pets to cattle, and from Verizon's perspective, they mentioned that. And how do they get everyone on board, and so they don't have to reinvent this with every vendor, with every network functions, and do this in a consistent, coherent manner. And so what are some of the drivers behind automation, right? So first is, there was talk about, in the earlier presentations regarding complexity. Everyone is introducing a little bit more complexity with cloud native. And so, with CNFs being composed of microservices, the transition from large physical elements to virtual network functions, and now to many smaller microservices, and then the ability to horizontally scale. That's, one reason for wanting automation is the complexity behind the applications. The second one is reduction in OpEx, right? So beyond, the standard, savings in time, going from, say, 2 hours to introduce something to 5 minutes, is clearly one big aspect. But then there's a lot of other drivers behind wanting to automate, right? How do you reduce errors? There was a mention of configuration drift. With the automation tools, you have a single source of truth that is external to the cloud native function that defines the configuration and defines the deployment. That leads to faster troubleshooting, right? And so these are, I think, some of the other key total cost of ownership savers for our customers. So we keep this in mind very, very much. And then, the ability to quickly define and deliver features and services. How do you realize value faster, create, update, test, and deploy more quickly? So what we at Ribbon do, we provide the automation technology that goes with our cloud native function, in terms of a declarative API and concepts like that, to basically make sure that we are not only addressing the application and the function, but also the operational side of things, which are extremely important. So now, clearly, I think most of you have seen this diagram. This is the ideal panacea between, a vendor and how CI/CD and cloud native is supposed to work. Not everybody is there in terms of lifecycle management, the provisioning phases, the testing phases, the observability. And so at Ribbon, what we're doing is we are our own customer. So we have some hosted services, and we are absorbing our own applications and using these approaches to incorporate these principles back into our own environment first before we hand it over to our customers. And so these are the type of things we are doing to, basically incorporate best practices even before we ever get to our customers. So with that, let me give you an example. So we have a deployment underway at a large tier 1. So this particular customer has started in the RAN, it started in the edge, went cloud native there, and now is moving into the core. And so what we are doing is, in terms of voice services, we are providing network interconnects into different carriers and into this provider's fixed network. So all the applications here are cloud native. We have a single management platform, basically, that is used to manage the cloud native functions, as well as provide single pane of glass, observability, and those aspects which are critical in terms of operations. And then we also provide the automation framework that goes along with the cloud native functions. So again, you can see it's not only about the application, but it's also everything around it that makes it easy for service providers to deploy our network functions. So I went through that very quickly, but just wanted to summarize and end here. So at Ribbon, our approach again is we not only make sure that everything is cloud native in terms of the application, but we also make sure that in terms of operations, we ease the pain and the burden on our service provider customers. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Sanjay. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us today and for sending all those questions to the Q&A tab and the chat this evening and afternoon. Right. A special thank you, of course, to our partners for the session, Google Cloud, Red Hat, Ribbon, and Robin, and of course to our speakers and panelists who I think have given us plenty to think about as we navigate the telco cloud revolution. I hope you can join us tomorrow. We are going to start at 11 a.m. Eastern. That's 4 p.m. UK time for a discussion and a deep dive into hybrid and multi-cloud strategies for the telco. So until then, thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.